Hey, everybody, welcome to your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad that you're with us today. So, we have all heard that America is in the middle of a quote unquote retirement crisis. But what if the story's not quite true? What if retirees today are actually doing better than we think, and that the challenge lies somewhere else entirely? Today, we're digging into those questions with Andrew Biggs. He's the author of the new book, The Real Retirement Crisis: How to Fix What's Wrong with America's System of Old Age Security. Before I bring him in, let me tell you just a bit about him. Andrew is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He has spent decades studying retirement policy. He served as the principal deputy commissioner of Social Security, a former official at the White House and Social Security Administration office, and has written and researched extensively on how Americans are really doing when it comes to their retirement readiness. Few people understand the realities of retirement and Social Security better than Andrew, so we are thrilled to have him with us today. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Jean. It's great to be with you.
I'm appreciative. I know you got up early to tape with us, so we are grateful.
I'm happy to do it.
So, Andrew, many of our viewers often hear that the U.S. retirement system is in crisis. In your new book, you argue that narrative is exaggerated, that maybe it's even wrong. Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Sure. I mean, it's very common to read that Americans aren't saving enough for retirement, that retirement is getting worse, that we even face a retirement crisis. When you look at the data, though, it tells a very different story. For instance, retirement plan coverage today, the opportunity to have a retirement plan at your workplace, much higher today than back in the past. More Americans are participating in the retirement plans because we use things like automatic enrollment. If we look at data on how much people are contributing to their plans as a percentage of their salaries, much higher today than in the past. Retirement plan assets today, the total amount of retirement savings are something like 6 times higher than what we had back in the 1970s when traditional pensions still roamed the earth. And it's not just savings, we're also working longer. Back in the 1990s, labor force participation at older ages was at record lows. And people asked, can Americans work longer? Can we delay retirement? Today, we know the answer to that. Labor force participation for 55 to 64-year-olds is the highest it's ever been. That means more time to work, more time to build savings. On top of that, we're claiming Social Security 2 years later on average today than we did back in the 1990s. The average person today claims Social Security at 65 compared to back in the 90s. That's an extra 12, 13% to your Social Security benefit that lasts for as long as you live. All of this has resulted in retirees today having the highest incomes on record. In fact, the highest incomes in the developed world, according to the OECD. So the data really tell a story that is very different than what you'll read in the newspaper. And it's really a much more encouraging story.
I agree with everything you said. I do think there are sections of the population, people who work for small companies, people who work for themselves, that have been traditionally shut out of the 401k system. But the one thing that you didn't mention in all of that good news was longevity, which is when it comes to paying for a retirement that's going to last a longer period of time. I guess it's not bad news, but it's definitely a question mark.
Oh, sure. It's Americans are living longer on average. Not everyone is, and that's something we have to be mindful of. Americans are living longer on average, and so your retirement savings have to last longer, and that's definitely a factor. But the fact that we're working longer on average and that we're saving more makes up for that. So it's there's a variety of different things going on here, but Americans are responding by saving more than they did in the past. That's the data are clear on that.
Is saving more the same as saving enough? We often see headlines that tell us that Americans are not saving enough, and I think when at least to me, and I read these pretty carefully, when they are broken down to look at mean retirement savings rather than average retirement savings, because the average is so skewed by the wealthy, it does cause me to worry that there are a good chunk of people who are not saving enough.
Well, here's a way, as a retirement researcher, trying to determine how much is enough is an incredibly complex thing. And everybody will be honest in the field that it's a very sort of imprecise measure. But here's a simple way of looking at it. First, ask yourself, do we have a retirement crisis today? Among retirees today, is there really a crisis of inadequate incomes? Again, I'll say highest incomes on record, not just at the mean, which is skewed by outliers, but at the median, the middle distribution.
Right.
If we look down in, say, the 25th percentile, record highs. If you look at poverty rates, the Census Bureau just published some data recently that show the risk of falling into poverty in old age has dropped by 1/3 since 1990 alone. So we have, and you can simply ask retirees. Gallup regularly asks, do you have enough money, not just to survive, but to, quote, live comfortably? 80% or 8 out of 10 retirees say yes. Only about 5% of retirees say they're finding it difficult to get by. That's from a Federal Reserve survey. So really there's no plausible argument to face retirement crisis today. And then you have to say, okay, are workers today saving more for retirement than today's retirees did back when they were working? And there's a variety of ways of looking at it. I did a study a couple of years ago, and what I found is retirement savings, including retirement accounts, but also the amounts that people have sort of accrued under traditional pensions. You put those together, they are at record high levels in every age group, every income group, every educational group, and every racial or ethnic group. So if today's retirees don't face a crisis, and we're saving more for retirement today than we did in the past, it just at the gut check level, we're not likely to have a retirement crisis in the future. I mean, when I was at the Social Security Administration, we worked with very, very sophisticated models to project what seniors will have in the future. And really what got me thinking about this narrative of the retirement crisis is the career employees at SSA said, look, we're just not projecting what these people are claiming that we're going to get. They think the retirement income adequacy for future retirees will be pretty much the same as it is today, which is good, but that poverty in old age is going to decline. And so it doesn't mean we don't have challenges, doesn't mean we shouldn't work to improve things. We should in every area of public policy. But the idea that we face some unique crisis in our retirement system when our retiree incomes are at record highs, it just strikes me as scaremongering.
I think that the EBRI study that every year, the retirement confidence study that every year takes the pulse of people who are pre-retirement and asks if they're afraid of not having enough money in retirement, and then compares it to people who are actually in retirement. You do see the people who are actually in retirement say they are feeling better than those who are not quite there yet, which I think means there is some additional fear in the system that maybe
Sure.
there should not be there. You write in the book, though, that if there is a crisis, it's not with people saving through 401ks or IRAs or pensions. It's almost entirely on the government side. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is true in the United States. It's true really in every country around the world. If you look at what are called the retirement savings gap, the amount of extra money you need for people to have secure retirements, most of that comes from the government side. If you look at Social Security, it is underfunded by $25 trillion. I've worked on the issue, but for 4 decades, Congress has effectively ignored the problem, just kicked the can down the road. I think plausible numbers for the retirement savings gap on the household side of what Americans themselves should be saving, a couple of $1 trillion, which is when you think the total retirement savings we have are in the tens of trillions, is really not that much. So it's overwhelmingly the gap is on the government side. And this stands to reason that politicians like to promise things. They don't like to make you pay for them. But for all the failings people have in preparing for retirement on their, financial illiteracy and problems like that, people know that if I save more today, I will have more in the future. The incentives are in the right direction. With programs like Social Security, also state and local government employee pensions, things like that, there's always an incentive to put it off, always an incentive to promise without paying for it. So in the book, I look at a range of estimates of the retirement savings gap, among households, of how much they should be saving for retirement. Even the worst case projections, which are, to be honest, not very plausible, but even those worst case projections are dwarfed by the size of the Social Security funding gap. So the data are really very clear. The problem, the real retirement crisis, as it were, is not with Americans not saving for much retirement on their own. It's really with government failing to fix Social Security, failing to fix Medicare, failing to fix state and local government pensions. That's where the problem really lies.
You spent time at the Social Security Administration, in the government. How do you think this crisis shakes out? I mean, I think people get nervous every time we get a new report that says the year is getting closer, at which point the trust fund can only pay out what it takes in.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, despite my youthful appearance, I will turn 65 in the mid 2030s. Right when Social Security's trust fund is projected to run dry. So I've timed things very well. I don't lose sleep over it. And the reason is that, technically speaking, when Social Security's trust fund runs dry, the system can only pay the benefits that it can afford to pay through payroll taxes, which would mean about a 20% benefit cut. The reality is that Congress isn't going to allow that kind of cut overnight. It's probably not going to allow that kind of cut at all. But it is particularly not going to allow that kind of cut for the people who need Social Security the most. If you're somebody for whom it makes a real difference, whether your Social Security benefit is cut by 10 or 20%, probably you're not going to get much of a cut at all. So it's, we do have to make changes over the long term. And I'll be honest, in the book, I argue that the high income retirees over time should get lower benefits than they get today. I mean, the maximum Social Security benefit today for a couple is about $100,000. No other country on earth pays that. So, we should fix that. But the idea that overnight we're going to cut benefits for low-income retirees by 20% and throw millions of people into poverty, that's not going to happen. The real problem on Social Security, to be honest, isn't going to be for the retirees. It's really for the federal budget. They have to figure out how we're going to pay for all these additional benefit costs while doing the other things you want government to do, while trying to get debt under control. And for retirees, middle class, upper income retirees, they need to think about both sides of the equation, in the sense that, no, they don't want their Social Security benefits to be cut. They also don't want the federal government to run into a debt crisis or a fiscal crisis where interest rates rise, the stock market drops, because that's going to affect your other investments. So we do need a balance. It's not just enough to say, oh, don't cut my benefits, because if that's going to bankrupt the federal government, then that's a problem for you too.
Sure.
So we need a balanced approach to this.
You mentioned Medicare, and it's another problematic piece of the puzzle. How do you think that component gets fixed?
Healthcare is an incredibly complex issue. Medicare is a monster player in our healthcare market, but it's also influenced by the rest of the market. Ideally, I'll put it to you this way. In terms of the Medicare problem, what we think about it is, we think, well, we have demographics, more retirees, and then we think of like healthcare inflation. We'll rise in prices for healthcare. It's actually more subtle than that. We do have more retirees, and we have healthcare inflation. Medicare could afford to pay that. The real thing that tips it over the edge is what's called healthcare intensity. It's not the cost of your MRI or the cost of your drug. It's the fact that we're using more and more and more of these things. And we do simply use more healthcare than people in other countries do. So at some point we have to decide, do we want to scale that back, or do we want to pay for it? Those are the choices we face. There's no magic to this. But again, as with Social Security, there's always the temptation to put it off. But one thing I do touch on in the book, and this is a really frightening thing for people, is thinking about healthcare and retirement. How much is it going to cost me? What if I go into a nursing home? It's almost too detailed a topic to get into, and we could put an entire episode on this. But what I'll say is the amount of information out there about retiree healthcare and nursing home costs, the frightening stuff is almost always misleading.
Well, let's actually get into why a little bit, because we have a recent survey from the Alliance for Lifetime Income, our PRIP survey, we call it, and it shows well over half of pre-retirees and retirees are not only fearful of outliving their savings in retirement, but inflation and healthcare are the biggest reason. And 60% say that healthcare is their top concern. And I'm sure they are including long-term care in that number.
Sure. Healthcare drives people's perceptions of retirement. If you look at like the EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey that you mentioned, there's all these different factors that people are asked about. The core issue is if you're confident that Medicare is not going to go bankrupt, you're pretty confident in retirement overall. If you think Medicare is going to go under, it doesn't matter all the other things, you're going to be scared. So that really does concern people. As with Social Security, I think the idea that Medicare is going to collapse is just simply overstated. At the same time, people just need to understand our perceptions of retirement, to healthcare and retirement, are influenced by what we read. For instance, just the other day I read this headline: "Well, you're going to need $176,000 for healthcare and retirement." People think, "Where am I going to get that money?" The same data show that people are going to spend, over $80,000 in the retirement on cable TV. You need to put this stuff in context. I mean, put cable TV and your cell phone together is probably how much you're going to spend in retirement. But really, there is this, and this is one of the themes of the book of why are we so scared? There's simply incentives, whether it's in the news media or industry or politics, to scare people. And, the vast majority of people, don't pay very much on nursing home costs. Most people do fine on healthcare and retirement. If healthcare or any other factor were crushing retirees, you would see that in things like surveys when people say, how well am I doing financially? You would see it in things like bankruptcy rates for retirees, which are much lower than for younger people. So we really do need to say, if all these scary things were true, how come we're not seeing these terrible outcomes for retirees? And the fact is we're not seeing them. So it's important to understand people are worried. Especially if you're preparing for retirement, it's understandable to be worried. You have one shot at doing this. It demands all these mathematical calculations. So what's the rate of return on my savings? What's my future earnings going to be? How long am I going to live? Look, it's understandable. People are worried. This is really hard to do. But what you find is most people are pleasantly surprised by how they do in retirement. They worry throughout their working life. And then they get to retirement like, oh, wow, I'm actually doing okay. So it's, I don't want people to worry, but I'd rather have that than the reverse. We do not have this idea of people are, blissfully going along and they discover they don't have enough money. That is really atypical. Most people are pleasantly surprised by how well they do in retirement.
One of the other things that's shown up in the Alliance research is that people save and save and save and save, and then they actually have trouble flipping the switch and spending the money on themselves. There's a lot of money sitting unintended in IRAs at the end of life that's being passed on to prior generations when maybe some of those folks would have had a better even standard of life had they been willing to spend a little bit more on themselves and their own enjoyment. How do you see the decumulation side of things playing out? And do you see ways that we could be doing it better?
Sure. The spend down phase is complicated, and there's a variety of things that are going on. I mean, I will say, in along with my general good news theme here, if our problem is not that people don't have enough money, but they're not spending enough of their money, that shows we're in a pretty good situation to start with. But it is true that people have a very hard time converting lump sums to saying, how much can I have every month? I have to pay my cable bill every month. I have recurring bills. I want to do things. How much can I afford? Purchasing an annuity is one way to do that, where you take a lump sum, like from a 401k, and you convert it into what an old style pension would do, where you have a check that arrives in your bank account every month. It's constant. It's not going to go up and down with the stock market, but it's also something that's not going to run out. So two fears people have are what's going to happen with my investments and how long am I going to live? And purchasing an annuity can help solve both those problems. And so some people might want to take all of their savings and convert it to an annuity so that Social Security along with the annuity would be exactly the same as traditional pension. Other people might want to take some of their money and say, I want to have some base, that Social Security plus some base amount, and I'm always going to have that. And then I can play around with the rest, do with it whatever I want. So those kinds of financial products, they're solving problems that people have and giving them options that they might not otherwise have had. So I think they're just a great thing for people to look at.
And we're starting to see them, thanks to the Secure Act, move into retirement plans. You mentioned that the savings side of things has really benefited from all of the automation that's been put into 401ks and similar work-based plans. The fact that people are auto-enrolled, their contributions are auto-escalated. They go up a percentage or two a year until you max out. People are defaulted into target date funds, so they're not having their money sit in money markets where it's not making them any money. Do you think that this is coming on the spending side of things as well?
I think so. I mean, this whole process you're talking about, retirement people say that 401ks are becoming pensionized, that it used to be that you had to decide how to allocate all your money. You had to decide how much to contribute. You had to change your asset allocations. Then you had to figure out how to spend it down. And that's becoming automated now. So the retirement, the 401k system today is very different than when it started in the 1980s. And it's a much more efficient system, much more easy to use system. But the drawdown is kind of the last step of that people don't spend a lump sum in retirement. They spend some amount each month, each year. And we do know, I mentioned earlier that the importance of having a retirement plan in the workplace, that, in theory, you could have an IRA and do much the same. But when you have it at work, it becomes, people just participate in more, they do more. Building those annuity options, the lifetime income options into a 401k, it just makes it easier for people. People feel uncomfortable. I'm going to take all this money out of my 401k and send it to somebody else. If you can have that option right there and decide how much you want to do, it simply makes life easier for people. And that's what we want to do. We don't want this to be hard. We want it to be easy. So I think that is the next step that we're looking at.
From a policy perspective, what else can be done to make it easier for people to improve their retirement landscape? And I'm thinking not just of people who have access to workplace plans, but you're right. AARP had a study that showed that people were 15 times more likely to save in a retirement account if it could be done through a paycheck withdrawal, which for a lot of people at small companies or solopreneurs just doesn't happen. So what can be done governmentally to help the rest of the folks?
Well, I mean, I would be, remiss if I didn't say first, fix Social Security. I mean, fix the problem you've got or the problem you created before you address other things. But it's, thinking about sort of the private household retirement savings side. the vast majority of Americans who should be saving for retirement, who are the age and income level where they should be saving, are saving. And so the gaps in saving are really a lot smaller than people think. At the same time, we're a civilized country. There's no reason why we should have those gaps at all. We know that a workplace savings plan is much more effective than an IRA. So why are we not offering that to everyone? So I think, the Secure Act made baby steps in that direction of saying that every newly formed company must offer a retirement plan or whatever, or do automatic enrollment. We've got to go beyond that. And part of the purpose is, again, we don't want people to be scared. And so giving everybody that opportunity, even if it won't change participation all that much, to be honest, because most people who need to save are saving. But giving everybody that opportunity makes sense. But I will throw in one caveat. There is a lot of the times these sort of auto IRA or automatic enrollment plans are aimed at low income people, because we're convinced with all these poor people that are not saving for retirement, they need to be. When you think about it, you really run the numbers. A lot of them shouldn't be. They're getting a high replacement rate from Social Security. But on top of that is, if we enroll a lot of low-income workers into a retirement plan, they're going to end up with money at retirement. Guess what they're going to lose at retirement? Their Medicaid. That they're going to be forced to, because probably the bottom 20% of seniors are getting Medicaid. They're going to be disqualified from Medicaid until they spend down their savings, which seems to be not the point of what we're trying to do here. We want to make sure if they're saving for retirement, they're going to benefit from it. So policymakers, whether it's in the states or in Washington, D.C., need to think very carefully of how these things work together. We can't simply just push these people in if it's not going to benefit them. So a lot of sometimes these no-brainer solutions are actually a little more complicated than people think. But I think giving everybody a retirement plan, even auto-enrolling, but just thinking very carefully about how that's going to play out for low-income people who receive means-tested benefits. So I think we can solve a lot of these problems and give people peace of mind.
On that note, for people who feel like they are behind, or for people who are simply afraid, even if they're clearly not behind, what advice would you give them to just blow through that fear?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's one is to think carefully, and you can get estimates from your retirement plan, from Social Security, of the benefits you will get in retirement. And something like that can give some people some peace of mind of saying, okay, I'm in good shape. But if you say, or if you look at it and you say, I'm behind, I have not done what I needed to do, or you just want additional peace of mind, the most efficient thing is simply delay retirement by a couple of years, because that means you have more time to save for retirement, a few extra years of compounding of your existing savings. And once you get close to retirement, it's that compounding effect, which is doing the legwork. But on top of that, if you delay Social Security, for each year you delay, that's a 7% increase in your benefits for life. So delaying retirement is a very, very effective way of increasing your retirement income. And it's something that people can do at the end. They've discovered, oh, I should have saved more 30 years ago. Well, tough luck on that. You can't fix it. But if you can delay retirement by a year or so, that will have a meaningful effect on your income security in old age. And that's, people say, oh, well, Americans can't do that. From the data I cited before, we're already doing it. And so I'm not saying everyone can do it, but it is an option people really should look at if they find they're behind the eight ball.
Andrew Biggs, the book is The Real Retirement Crisis: Why Almost Everything You Know About the U.S. Retirement System is Wrong. Thank you so much for doing this today. If people want more information about you and your work, where would you send them?
Well, of course, they can buy the book conveniently at
course.
Amazon.com. You would be a fool not to. But on top of that, I work with the American Enterprise Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. We're at aei.org. I also write a Substack, free to everyone, called Little Known Facts, where I talk about retirement policy and a lot of the sort of data and facts that you honestly won't find anywhere else. So if you're interested in it, I think that's just a great place to look at the sorts of things that I'm talking about.
Well, I will be signing up for that as soon as we end this conversation. Thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And if you'd like more information about the work from the Alliance for Lifetime Income, you can find it at our website, which is protectedincome.org. We too have a newsletter. You can sign up for it there. It's protectedincome.org/subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.